Chapter 3. Practicing Patience. Faith often requires a special kind of waiting, not a fidgety, toe tapping, clock watching kind of waiting, but a restful waiting, a secure expectation. Patience is the practice of abiding, and one abides in one's abode. It's the kind of waiting that can happen only when one feels at home. Home, in a spiritual sense, is an inner realm ruled by an astute self acceptance and a wise fondness for the world at large. In this home, there is always a good telescope at the window, its optics lovingly maintained, pointed towards the ever changing face of creation. Around this home are acres of rolling meadows yielding to limitless expanses of wild forests, mountains, and sea. To wait patiently for anything or anyone is to remember that we can always sit by the window or on the porch of our inner home and experience the timelessness of the Spirit. Like a breeze that blows through our open windows carrying the news from the great beyond. If anyone tells you to be patient, in quotes, you can repeat it to yourself as be at home. When patience is called for, retreat to the inner stable center where you can abide. When patience is called for, retreat to your inner stable center where you can abide. Patience is an instinct we all carry within us, for it is the human experience of nature's timing. The rose unfolds patiently. A tree grows old and great the same way. Of course, we may forget the instinct of patience just as easily, and as painfully as we forget about nature abiding within us. What we choose to believe about ourselves, what we pretend is important, is what sends us rushing against the clock in a senseless way. When we remember that our true nature, what remains magnificent within us, this gives us the capacity to live without the fear of time. Patience is deciding in favor of attention rather than tension. I'll say that one more time. Patience is deciding in favor of attention rather than tension. Attending to the inner part of ourselves that knows timelessness, we can wait in the world of time and balance our hurried sense of self-interest with the timeless knowledge that all will be well. Even when the all swallows us, as it inevitably will. Patience, then, is also humility, a surrender to the transcendent. Patience is the rhythm of faith. How to practice patience. Be compassionate towards your impatience. This is not the same as doing its bidding or believing everything it tells you. Instead, accept that impatience signals an inner belief that you are somehow being cheated, insulted, forgotten, or ignored by others, by God, or by yourself. In any case, implementing compassion for your impatience means choosing the most productive route towards whatever you are waiting for. This entails asking what you are really even waiting for, in the biggest possible sense, even if your impatience at the moment is about something petty. But if you are impatient for something petty, why waste the precious energy of your awareness on something so unimportant? Rather than chafing perpetually against the delay of what you want, you can give yourself the inner comfort of a secure expectation that what you truly need will eventually be delivered, and that whatever you expect but don't need will eventually fall out of your awareness. If you are impatient for something large and important, like justice for all, then you need to choose the most effective state of mind on which to base your actions. Acting on a righteous impatience sometimes gets results, but there is always some war created around the edges. A righteous patience derives from a clearer vision that is merciful towards all, even the perceived perpetuators of insult and injustice. A righteous patience brings unseen powers to bear on your situation, because it is a state of mind aligned with your inborn spiritual purpose. This state of mind might also be called sublime confidence. A confidence not that your little self will be served in all of its chaotic, shifting aims, but that the greater good of all will be served by your acceptance of deep guidance. Therefore, to practice patience is to use your impatience as a signal to call on greater powers. Whenever you are stuck in a traffic jam or waiting for world peace, replace the anxious queries of when and how much longer with the reassurance that God is with me, or whatever else I may feel, there is also a great peace within me, always. That's how to cease waiting for events and transport yourself into timeless contemplation. Of course, this is not to say that one can or should disconnect from the world's problems or concerns. In fact, everyone is capable of timeless contemplation while attending effectively to the situation at hand. For the key to faith and equanimity is a constant awareness of two worlds of experience. If we are completely absorbed by the timed material world, then our lives will tend to be mean and dispirited. If we are completely absorbed by the timeless spiritual world, we cannot function effectively in an everyday world that needs our contributions. The finest impatience. Patience is waiting with intention. The finest kind of patience carries the intention of love. Intending to love, we may sometimes fall short and become impatient, but even so, we can say that the intention of love is behind the finest kind of impatience. It's patience versus passivity. Because patience has an intent, it should not be confused with an unhealthy passivity. That is, waiting around for something good to happen because we do not want to work for change. If you want to get struck by lightning, you can't do it by curling up on the couch under a warm blanket in the safety of your own home while a storm rages outside. You have to be willing to run out into an open field in the middle of the storm and wait out there, soaked and shivering, and then it still may not even happen. But who wants to get struck by lightning anyway? The lightning that's worth waiting for and shivering for is enlightenment. A shocking moment of growth in which some habitual, fearful part of oneself gets burned away and something new, pure, and childlike emerges to refresh and renew one's way of life. In various traditions, such a shock is also called kensho, or self-realization, or the holy instant. The bolt of enlightenment seldom strikes the passive, those attempting to sleep through life, who only grumble to turn over on the couch when prodded to awaken. This kind of lightning does eventually strike the patient. It hits those who have ventured bravely into storm after storm of self-confrontation and waited studiously, their faces upturned to the rain and the roiling clouds. The irony is that when lightning does strike the patient seeker, it usually happens when least expected. A bolt from the blue, as the old saying goes. Once it has been received by someone willing, this kind of lightning can find the same target again and again in a single lifetime. Enlightenment strikes many times before the burning it gives is complete. Discipline, will, and patience. I've had a struggle with discipline all of my life, torn between an attraction to rigorous physical or mental regimens and an equally powerful yearning to relax, to be self satiated without having to self correct, to let come what may. Although I began working at a young age with disciplines like yoga and meditation, beginning the latter before I even knew what I was doing, I never applied myself consistently or for very long periods before forgetting my routines and becoming distracted by other concerns. Even then, I would betray myself for being impatient and, and lacking willpower. And then I would berate myself for being impatient and lacking willpower. Now that I have learned to maintain several steady, if not rigid, disciplines, I realized I used to have the means and ends all mixed up. Patience and a reliable will are what you learn by taking up disciplines, failing with them, and starting them over again, refining your direction and intensity at every step. Whatever else a discipline may promise, a clear mind, a lithe body, and some well honed skill, is actually secondary to the development of one's faithfulness. The slowly gathered will and patience to refocus the mind on an intent to suffer less by changing oneself for the better. We are always changing the world. In the midst of our pains, distractions, and forgetfulness, it's easy for us to create negative change through mistakes, ill will, or negligence. Thus, any noticeable improvement in this world is no accident. Someone with transformative discipline will have been on the scene recently. Waiting for nothing. What I once thought about patience was nothing compared to what I learned in the experience of total defeat about by a prolonged illness. The peculiar nature of my disease seemed to be designed for the teaching of patience, for I had to spend long periods of time in considerable pain and exhaustion, barely functioning, without noticeably improving or getting any worse. For the greater part of 3 years, I lived in a chaotic and disheartening limbo, unable to prepare for the return of health, but certain that I was not facing death either. Improvements and relapses occurred in such nonsensical patterns that I could never be sure of whether my medicines, attitude adjustments, or hard bargained life changes were helping me or not. Until I became ill, I had always missed the presence of a single great teacher in my life. Someone whose power and wisdom would be so great and obvious that I could openly submit myself to that teacher's will. My devotional drive had always been effectively countered by a sharp eye for human frailties. I was not about to be taken in by some crackpot guru. So life sent me a great but inhuman teacher who would prove more cruel, irrational, and ultimately instructive than any human guru I have ever heard of. This crackpot guru lived in my own veins and tissues, and I unwittingly invited him in with my skepticism, bitterness, and faithlessness. Once inside me, he would not be dislodged by mere plaints, prayers, or pills. So I learned to wait through storms and tortures, through bedridden boredom and wild lonesomeness, past all reason or sensible expectations. I learned to wait for nothing because everything seemed lost. And then, as I fitfully began to recover, miraculous things happened that I could have never imagined, and certainly weren't on any of my old schedules. And that would direct my life onto a new and unexpected path. When you learn to wait patiently for nothing, your inner teacher can begin to arrange your real life, working noiselessly and invisibly behind the screen of apparent reality, deftly moving people, signs, and circumstances into open view at just the right time for you to recognize them as accelerators of your new and yet ancient purpose. Perhaps there are easier ways to learn this kind of mystical, transformative waiting than being taught patience by defeat. Defeat just happens to be my teacher, a better and more exhaustive teacher than I could have sought out consciously. So I know what happens when Godot arrives. He brings an end to aimlessness, and he brooks no compromise. The river of possibilities. Patience recognizes that there is always a much greater range of possibilities at hand than the limited outcomes we can plan, predict, or produce. Impatience awaits something in particular. Patience expects the continuous flow of the unexpected. To be patient about the sights and sounds ahead on a journey down the river, imagine the point of view of the river, waiting for the world to change. I used to be more aggravated with the world and more impatient for monumentous social changes to come about quickly. I was focused on political aims and reform and saw anyone with differing politics as obstacles to the changes that anyone in their right mind, my mind that is, should desire. Thus, my approach to world changing was plugged into the oppositional tug of war that has always characterized political struggle. It's probably fortunate that I had little or no political effect during the years that I believed in struggle and opposition. I was actually too self absorbed to have much effect beyond my immediate concerns and relationships, and I maintained a personal complacency that was actually antithetical to change. By age 30, I had decided that there was little possibility of altering my fundamental assumptions and ways of relating. After all, I reasoned, I was an adult, and whoever I had become by that age was who I was likely to remain. It would take me a while to realize that my impotent anxiousness for the world to change arose primarily from my refusal to change myself. All of this is different for me now. Being on a spiritual path means accepting citizenship in a world of ongoing transformation. With experience, it becomes increasingly difficult and unimportant to distinguish one's inner world from the outer, or the observer and from the observed. A spiritual perspective is constantly expanding beyond the individual's narrowly focused needs and prejudices. This perspective actually engenders more direct and effective responses to the world's problems than the oppositional politics of the ego. One should keep in mind, however, that a spiritual response doesn't always operate in visible realms, and so its effect cannot always be quantified. In general, it can be said that a spiritual politics demonstrates the qualities of humility, charity, and an ever widening attentiveness, which compare well to the ego's conventional politics of arrogance, suspicion, and one-tracked stubbornness. Above all, a spiritual politics demonstrates a caring patience founded in the awareness that the world, like the individual, seldom changes for the better as quickly as we would like. In both cases, the same difficulty may be at hand. And for we see how the world has a great deal to do with our own inner difficulties. In my case, I have missed too far of my private deadlines for change ever to lay another judgment on other people, cultures, nations, or the world at large for not changing fast enough. I don't know how much can be changed or how quickly the world's great pain can be eased, but I am now certain that patience increases possibilities and reduces suffering. For me, waiting for the world to change means making the best possible use of my own time. Patience, gentleness, and subtlety. The politics of a practical faith might be best described as patience within, gentleness without. As a pioneering, bulldozing culture, we are used to equating strength with force, especially violent force. And so we are slow to recognize the subtler strength of patience and gentleness. But it has been observed by many that it is the gentle warrior who wins without a fight. It has even been rumored that the meek shall inherit the earth. If the future is already in their hands, then the meek, who are also the patient, the gentle, and the subtle, must be more powerful than we imagined.